The wind in those hills has a voice, if you know how to listen. Most folks, fresh off the boat or the train, they just hear a howl, a lonely, nerve-shredding sound that makes them bar their doors a little tighter and question why they ever left Ohio. But Emma Jane Thompson, she'd learned its language. She'd been out on her own for 3 years, ever since the fever came, and took her husband, Samuel. A doctor he was, a good man. Now he was just a memory and a wooden cross on a hill overlooking their small cabin. Emma could hear the promise of rain in the wind's low murmur. She could feel the bite of a coming frost in its sharp whistle across the plains. But on this day, she heard something new. It was a sound of pure distress, a frantic, rhythmic gasp that was not the wind. Not an animal, it was human. Her homestead was an island in a sea of trouble. To the east, you had the muddy streets of the new settlements, full of gold-hungry prospectors with desperation in their eyes. To the west and all around her were the Paha Sapa, the sacred hills of the Lakota, a people who'd been promised this land by a treaty, only to see that promise shattered by the very men who'd signed it. Emma stood on her porch, a woman of 30 who looked older. The land does that to you, but her hands, though rough from chopping wood, were steady, rock steady, a trait she got from her father, a watchmaker, and one that her doctor husband had relied on. There it was again, a pained, guttural groan, carried on the breeze from the creek at the edge of her property. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her gut. Her first thought was the shotgun, the double-barreled greener Samuel had taught her to use. A lone woman in this place was a target, and not all the predators walked on 4 legs. But then another voice cut through the fear, Samuel's voice, clear as day in her memory. "You don't ask who they are, Emma," he used to say, his hands working to save some poor soul. "You ask where it hurts." She hesitated for only a second. She turned and grabbed the leather medical satchel from its hook by the door. Samuel's tools were still inside, scalpels and forceps, alongside her own remedies of yarrow and willow bark. She tucked a Colt peacemaker into the waistband of her skirt, a cold piece of reassurance against her skin. Then she walked toward the sound. The walk to the creek was like descending into another world. The tall pines blocked the sun, and the air grew cool and damp. The groaning grew louder, closer. She pushed aside a curtain of wild willow branches. And she saw him. He was Lakota, no doubt about it. The high cheekbones, the long black hair matted with sweat and dirt. He was young, maybe 20, his face a twisted mask of agony. He was lying on his side, pressed against a granite boulder, his hands clenched around his right thigh. Blood had soaked through his buckskin leggings, pooling on the pine needles below. A dark, ugly stain on the forest floor. Emma froze. This wasn't just an injured man. This was a statement. A Lakota warrior, bleeding out on land the government had stolen and given to settlers like her. Helping him could get her killed. The prospectors, the soldiers, they spoke of the Lakota with a poison that dripped from their tongues. To be branded an Indian lover was a death sentence. She could turn back. Right now. No one would ever know. He would die here, alone, and the wind would be the only one to mourn him. She took a step back, her hand touching the grip of the pistol. Then the young man's eyes flickered open. They were dark, clouded with pain, but for a split second they focused on her. There was no hate in them, no anger, just a raw, desperate plea for life. In that moment, he wasn't a warrior. He wasn't an enemy. He was just a boy, bleeding to death on the cold ground. "Damn it all, Samuel," she whispered to the ghost of her husband. She knelt beside him. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical focus, a doctor's focus. "It's all right," she said softly, her tone gentle, even if he couldn't understand the words. "I'm here to help." His eyes widened with suspicion as she reached for his leg. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Easy," she murmured, holding her hands up, palms open. She pointed to the satchel, then to his wound. "Medicine," she said, tapping her chest. "Doctor." He watched her, his gaze sharp despite the pain. He was weighing his chances, a certain death alone, or a possible one with this strange white woman. After a long moment, he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She had to see the wound. She pulled a pair of heavy shears from the bag. The sight of the steel made him tense. Shh, she soothed. Just the leggings. She made a snipping motion in the air before carefully touching the shears to the bloody buckskin. As she cut away the material, she had to stifle a gasp. It was a bullet hole, all right. A big one. The entry point was a ragged, dark circle, but the exit wound on the back of his thigh was a crater of shredded muscle and splintered bone. A slug from a Sharp's rifle, the kind the buffalo hunters used. But there was something else, something wrong. Tucked deep inside the mangled tissue, something glinted in the dim light. It wasn't lead. It was a shard of dark obsidian-like glass, crudely shaped into an arrowhead. It had been packed into the wound after he was shot. This wasn't a hunting accident. This was an execution, a message. He wouldn't last the night out here. Infection, blood loss, a predator. He was a dead man. Moving him was a terrible risk. Leaving him was a guarantee. She had to get him to the cabin. "We have to move," she said, more to herself than to him. She mimed standing up. He tried to push himself up, but a wave of pain sent him crashing back with a sharp cry. There was only one way. Emma was strong, hardened by years of homestead life, but he was solid muscle. She looped her arms under his and grunted, "On three, 1, 2, 3." With a cry of pure effort, she heaved him up. He screamed, a raw sound that the forest swallowed whole. It became a torturous shuffle, a half-carry, half-drag through the woods. His blood left a trail, a bright red path of breadcrumbs leading directly to her front door, a trail for anyone to follow. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was gone, and Emma's muscles were on fire. She got him inside and he collapsed onto the bearskin rug, unconscious. She stood over him, panting, her dress stained with his blood. The terrifying reality of what she'd done hit her like a physical blow. A Lakota warrior was in her home. A blood trail led from the creek to her doorstep. She had just signed her own death warrant. She barred the door, covered the windows, and lit a lantern. The world outside, with its hate and its politics, would have to wait. Tonight, her only purpose was to fight the death that was already seeping into her floorboards. The night was a war fought by lantern light. Emma worked with a desperate energy, her mind a whirlwind of Samuel's lessons. She heated water, infusing it with herbs and precious salt. The young warrior's breathing was a shallow whisper. First, she had to get that shard of glass out. Using forceps sterilized in the lantern's flame, she probed the wound. The glass was wedged against the shattered femur. It was slick with blood, hard to grip. Every time she touched it, he groaned, his body twitching. Finally, she got a firm hold and pulled. It came free with a sickening squelch. It wasn't just a shard. It was a crudely made arrowhead with strange symbols carved into its surface. It looked ancient. She set it aside, a cold knot of dread in her stomach. What was this? Then came the bone. It wasn't a clean break. The femur was splintered. Setting it was beyond her experience. She took a deep breath, found a few drops of Samuel's laudanum to keep the man under, and grasped his lower leg. She pulled. A guttural sound of pure agony escaped his lips, even in his stupor. Emma felt a sickening grind as the bone fragments shifted. Sweat poured down her face. She pulled again, harder, using her body weight, feeling the bones scrape against each other. Finally, with a soft, wet click, she felt them align as best she could. She didn't dare let go. Holding the leg steady with one hand, she wrapped it in splints, binding it tight. The crisis of the break was over, but the threat of infection had just begun. She spent the next hour cleaning the wound, picking out tiny pieces of lead and bits of buckskin. Finally, she packed it with a poultice of yarrow and garlic and bandaged it tightly. Exhausted, she sank back on her heels. The warrior's breathing was deeper now. He was alive. She spent the rest of the night in a chair, shotgun across her lap, watching him. Near midnight, his eyes opened. They were clear, focused. He looked at his splinted leg, then at her. He spoke in his own tongue, the words soft. "I don't understand," she said. "My name is Emma." She pointed to herself. "Emma." He watched her lips, then repeated the sound. "Eh, ma." He tapped his own chest. "Chayton. Chayton," she repeated. It was the first bridge across the chasm between their worlds. For 2 days, a silent routine developed. She tended his wound, fed him broth. He watched her every move with an unnerving intensity. They communicated with gestures, a language born of necessity. They were two people from warring nations, trapped in a bubble of shared humanity. The quiet was shattered on the third morning. Hoofbeats, more than one horse, moving with confidence. Emma's blood ran cold. She peered through a gap in the window blanket. 3 men. And the man in the lead was Roman Fletcher. Fletcher was a predator in a man's skin. He'd been a buffalo hunter, an army scout, and now he owned the land bordering hers. He claimed to be a rancher, but everyone knew he made his money selling whiskey, cheating miners, and rustling. He had cruel, pale blue eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never touched them. He'd made a pass at her once after Samuel died. She'd refused him, and his smile had turned to poison. "Chayton," she hissed, turning from the window. "Quiet, not a sound." She made a slitting gesture across her throat. "Bad men." His eyes, which had started to see her as a healer, instantly hardened. He understood. He reached for the small knife still sheathed at his belt, the one she hadn't taken from him. He nodded, his jaw set. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Mrs. Thompson, you in there? It's Roman Fletcher, just paying a neighborly call." Emma took a deep breath, schooling her features into a mask of calm. She hid Chayton's knife and pulled a quilt over his lower body, covering the splint. She moved the shotgun out of sight, but kept the peacemaker tucked in her skirt. "Just a moment, Mr. Fletcher," she called out, her voice a little too high. She unbarred the door and opened it a crack, blocking the view. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Fletcher tipped his hat, his smile slick as oil. "Just checking on my favorite neighbor. Heard a commotion down by the creek a couple days back. Sounded like a gunshot. Figured I'd make sure you were all right." His eyes weren't on her face. They were trying to see past her into the cabin. "I'm fine, thank you," Emma said. "Must have been a cougar." Fletcher's smile widened. "A cougar, you say? Funny. I was tracking a different kind of animal, a red-skinned one. Winged him good with my sharps down by the creek, but the slippery devil got away. Left a blood trail a blind man could follow. Trails seemed to peter out right around here." The casual cruelty in his voice made her sick. He was the one. He had shot Chayton. "You ain't seen a stray Sioux boy, have you?" Fletcher continued. "Got a big hole in his leg? He was carrying something. Something that belongs to me." Her mind raced. The arrowhead. He wasn't just hunting a man. He was hunting an object. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, her voice dropping to an icy calm, "I have never seen a Sioux on my property. If I did, my shotgun would have something to say about it." It was a convincing lie, steeped in the prejudice he expected. He studied her face, his pale eyes searching. "Is that so? Mind if I come in for a drink of water? The trail has made me mighty thirsty." It wasn't a request, it was a test. Refuse, and he'd know she was hiding something. Let him in, and they were both dead. "Of course," she said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "Hospitality is a luxury I can still afford." She turned her back on him to get a cup, a calculated risk to project confidence. He stepped inside, his boots loud on the planks. His eyes immediately fell on the form under the quilt. "Well now, what's this?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Got company?" "My cousin's boy," Emma said without turning around, her heart hammering. "Came down with a terrible fever on the trail from Laramie, trying to sweat it out of him." Fletcher walked slowly toward the hearth, his spurs jingling a deathly tune. He stood over Chayton, looking down. Chayton lay perfectly still, feigning sleep. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of herbs and blood. "He looks dark-complected for your kin, Emma Jane," Fletcher said softly. His hand moved slowly, deliberately toward the edge of the quilt. At that exact moment, one of his men shouted from outside, "Roman, over here! Looks like that blood trail picked up again, behind the woodpile." Emma's heart stopped. She must have dripped some blood when she'd gone for firewood. A fatal mistake. Fletcher's head snapped up. The pretense was over. His eyes, now cold and hard as river stones, locked with hers. "You lying bitch," he hissed. He lunged. but not for the quilt. For her, the cabin exploded into chaos. Fletcher was fast, his hand clamping around her wrist with brutal force, twisting it until she cried out. "Should have known you were a squaw lover," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "After we deal with your pet, you and I are going to have a long talk." But he'd made a critical error. He'd underestimated the man on the floor. With a roar of pure fury, Chayton moved. Ignoring the agony in his leg, he threw off the quilt. In one fluid motion, he drew his knife and swiped at Fletcher's legs. The blade was razor sharp. It sliced deep into Fletcher's calf. Fletcher howled in pain and surprise, his grip on Emma loosening for a split second. It was all she needed. She stomped down hard on his instep, ripped her arm free, and stumbled back toward the fireplace, toward the hidden shotgun. Fletcher, enraged and bleeding, turned on Chayton. "You'll die for that, you filthy savage!" he bellowed, drawing his own massive Bowie knife. He raised the blade to plunge it into Chayton's chest. "Fletcher!" Emma's voice was a crack of thunder. He froze. She was standing by the fireplace, both barrels of the shotgun leveled directly at his heart. Her hands were rock steady. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice trembling with rage. Fletcher stared at the twin black holes of the muzzle. He was a bully, not a fool. He slowly lowered his knife. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Emma Jane," he whispered. "It is for today," she replied, not wavering. "Tell your men to back away from my home. Now." Fletcher backed toward the door, his eyes filled with a promise of retribution. "Boys, mount up," he yelled. He gave her one last look. "This ain't over. That trinket he was carrying, it's worth more than this whole damn territory, and I will have it." He slipped out the door. A moment later, she heard 3 horses galloping away. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy. She slid to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. Chayton was looking at her, the fire of battle in his eyes replaced by something else. Awe. He spoke a single word in Lakota, his voice filled with reverence. "Wichachala Wakan." He would later explain it meant holy woman, spirit woman. In that moment, a line had been crossed. She was no longer just his healer. She was his protector. And she had just declared war on Roman Fletcher over a mysterious object she didn't even understand. She crawled over to Chayton. His wound had reopened. "You fool," she whispered, her voice a mix of anger and relief. "You magnificent fool." As she redressed the wound, he reached out and gently touched her hair. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture made her stop. His eyes conveyed a gratitude that needed no words. They both knew Fletcher would be back. He wouldn't just bring 2 men next time, and he wouldn't knock. The rest of the day passed in a tense haze. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. As dusk began to settle, Chayton grew agitated. He kept looking toward the west. He grabbed Emma's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "They come," he said, using one of the few English words he knew. "Who, Fletcher?" she asked, her heart sinking. He shook his head, pointing west toward the heart of the Pahasapa. "My people." How could he possibly know? He'd sent no signal, but he was certain. He began to chant softly, a low prayer that filled the cabin with a strange solemnity. Emma didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. The arrival of the Lakota could mean rescue, or it could mean a bloodbath if Fletcher returned at the same time. The night stretched before them, an abyss of uncertainty. She barred the door, loaded the shotgun, and sat in her chair, opposite Chayton. 2 warriors from different worlds, waiting for a dawn that might never come. The first hint of light brought a new sound. Not the gallop of Fletcher's thugs. It was the soft, muffled tread of dozens of unshod ponies, a sound more felt than heard. Emma peered out the window, her breath caught in her throat. They were emerging from the pre-dawn mist like ghosts, a column of at least 30 Lakota warriors, their faces painted for war, silent, implacable. At their head rode an older man who commanded authority without a word. His face was a roadmap of sun and sorrow. He wore a full eagle feather war bonnet, a symbol of immense prestige. This was no mere war party. This was a chief. They fanned out, surrounding the cabin in a silent, menacing circle. They didn't attack. They just sat on their ponies, watching. The sheer silent power of their presence was more terrifying than any war cry. The cabin door creaked open. Chayton, using a piece of firewood as a crutch, had pulled himself to his feet. He stood in the doorway and called out a single name. "Ait! Father!" The chief's stoic expression broke, replaced by profound relief. He dismounted and strode toward the cabin. He stopped before Chayton, placing his hands on his son's shoulders, his eyes scanning the crude splint. He spoke in rapid Lakota. Chayton replied, his voice weak but clear, recounting the ambush, the pain, and his rescue. As he spoke, he gestured back into the cabin, toward Emma, who stood frozen by the hearth, shotgun clutched in her hands. The chief's gaze followed his son's. He looked directly at Emma. His eyes were piercing, as if they could see right through to her soul. He saw the blood, the medical supplies, the shotgun. He saw the defiance and the terror warring in her face. He stepped past his son and into the cabin. He was a tall man, and his presence seemed to suck all the air from the small room. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her. The fate of the white woman now rested entirely in this man's hands. He could honor her for saving his son, or he could kill her for being one of the people destroying his world. The sun was rising, but for Emma Jane Thompson, it felt as though the world was holding its breath. The chief stood before her, a mountain of silent judgment. His name was Tatanka Sapa, Black Buffalo, a name known and feared by the U.S. Army. His gaze swept over her, then to his son, then to the expertly crafted splint. His eyes settled on the dark stain on the floor where Fletcher's blood had mingled with Chayton's. He saw not just a scene of healing, but one of conflict. He spoke in Lakota, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. Chayton, still weak, translated. "My father asked who did this to me." "A man named Roman Fletcher," she replied, her own voice a whisper. "He shot you. He came here looking for you. He would have killed us both." Chayton relayed this. The chief's eyes narrowed. The name Fletcher was known to him, whispered with contempt. Black Buffalo looked at the shotgun in her hands. He spoke again. "He asked why you did not use this on me when I was brought here," Chayton translated. Emma's throat was dry. "My husband was a doctor," she said finally. "He taught me that a person in need has no tribe. They are just a life, waiting to be saved or lost. I chose to save." The translation was short, but its impact on Black Buffalo was visible. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften. He took a step closer, and Emma flinched. He stopped, holding up a hand in the universal sign of peace. He spoke again, his voice softer. "My father says that, in a world where your people see us only as beasts to be slaughtered," Chayton translated, his voice thick with emotion, "you saw a human being. He says your husband's spirit is strong in this house." Then Black Buffalo did something that stunned her. He reached up and plucked a single, perfect eagle feather from his war bonnet. It was a mark of honor, a symbol of great courage. He stepped forward and held it out to her. "He offers you this," said Chayton. "It is a sign that you are a friend to the Oglala, that this house is a place of peace." Hesitantly, Emma lowered the shotgun and took the feather. It felt as heavy as a stone, a weight of significance she could barely comprehend. But Black Buffalo was not finished. He turned and spoke to his son again, his voice urgent. Chayton's eyes widened as he listened. He turned back to Emma. "The man, Fletcher. He spoke of a trinket, an object I was carrying. Did you find it?" Emma nodded, her heart pounding. She walked to the small table where she'd placed the strange, carved arrowhead. She picked it up and held it out. When Black Buffalo saw it, he let out a sharp, reverent breath. He didn't take it. He simply stared at it as if it were the most sacred thing in the world. He began to speak, not to Emma, but to the spirits, to the sky. Chayton translated, his voice filled with awe. "This is the tooth of the skybreaker. It is an artifact of our people, passed down through generations of chiefs. It is not a map to gold. It is a key. It marks the entrance to our most sacred place, the winter lodge of our ancestors' spirits. It is where our history is kept. My father was sending me to hide it in the mountains, away from the encroaching whites." The pieces clicked into place. Fletcher hadn't just been hunting a man for a treasure map. He'd been about to commit an act of profound desecration to plunder a people's soul. Black Buffalo turned back to Emma. He placed his fist over his heart and began to speak in the formal, solemn cadence of a sacred vow. His voice rose and fell, a declaration for the hills and the sky to witness. I, Tatanka Sapa, chief of the Oglala Lakota, vow this oath, Chayton translated, his voice trembling. The woman who lives on this ground, this Wichachalawakan, she is under my protection. This land she calls her own. This land is Wakan. It is sacred. Any man, be he white or Lakota, who comes to this place to bring harm to this woman, his enemy is not her alone. His enemy is me. His enemy is the Oglala. We will be the arrow in the night. This I swear on the honor of my people. This protection is eternal. He finished, his hand held high. The silence that followed was absolute. He had not just offered protection, he had declared her small homestead a sovereign nation under his care. Without another word, Black Buffalo turned and strode from the cabin. His warriors brought a litter for Chayton. Before they carried him away, Chayton looked at Emma one last time. You did not just save my life, he said. You saved the memory of my people. Then they were gone, melting back into the pines. Emma stood in her doorway, clutching the eagle feather. The world looked the same, but everything had changed. She thought of Roman Fletcher. Let him come back. She was no longer a lone woman on a forgotten homestead. She was under the protection of a chief's oath. But as the initial elation faded, a cold sliver of apprehension crept in. This protection, this sacred vow, what would it cost her? She had a shield against one enemy, but in doing so, she had drawn a line in the sand between herself and her entire world. The oath was a shield, yes, but she had a sinking feeling it would also become a cage. The chief's oath was a quiet, pervasive thing. In the weeks that followed, Emma saw no Lakota. No warriors stood guard, yet she knew they were there. The signs were unmistakable. A storm felled a massive pine across her fence. The next morning the tree was gone, sawn into neat logs and stacked by her woodpile. A single hawk feather was left on top. When her meat supplies ran low as winter set in, a freshly killed doe appeared by her back door. But the protection had a darker side. Fletcher, to save face, spread a twisted version of the story. He claimed he'd been ambushed by a war party Emma was hiding. He painted her as a traitor. The next time she rode to Custer City for supplies, the change was palpable. Conversation stopped. Men who once tipped their hats now spat on the ground as she passed. The store owner served her quickly, his eyes downcast. People are saying things, Emma, he whispered, about you and the Sioux, about Fletcher. They believe him. Go home. Stay there. She was an outcast. The invisible shield of the Lakota had become a wall, cutting her off from her own kind. Fletcher didn't return himself, but he waged a war of isolation. He forced her nearest neighbor off their land, leaving her even more alone. He spread rumors her well was poisoned. No traveler sought shelter at her cabin. She became a ghost story, the Witch of the Black Hills. Years passed. The Great Sioux War of 1876 erupted, bathing the territory in blood. Custer fell at the Little Bighorn. The army flooded the plains, vengeful and relentless. The Lakota were hounded, starved, and forced onto reservations. Through it all, Emma's homestead remained an island of impossible peace. War parties and army patrols alike seemed to detour around her land, as if her 160 acres were a different country entirely. One bitter winter evening, nearly a decade after she had healed Chayton, there was a soft knock on her door. It was the first knock in years. Cautiously, she opened it. An old Lakota man stood in the swirling snow, gaunt and frail. It took her a moment to recognize the eyes. It was Chayton. He looked ancient, his body broken by defeat and despair. He told her his father, Black Buffalo, had been killed the year before, shot while resisting being moved to the Standing Rock Agency. He told her their way of life was over. He himself was on his way to the reservation, a prisoner in his own land. I came to tell you, he said, his English now proficient. The oath is ended. My father is gone. Our warriors are scattered. There is no one left to protect you. Emma looked at the man she had saved, this ghost from another lifetime. She brought him inside, sat him by the fire, and gave him a hot meal, just as she had all those years ago. The oath was never just from your father, Chayton, she said softly, looking at the eagle feather, which still rested on her mantle. It was a promise between two people. It doesn't end with death. It lives right here. She touched her heart. He stayed for 2 days. As he was about to leave, he hesitated at the door. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice low. "Fletcher, I have heard whispers. He lost everything after the gold rush. He is an old man now, but his hate has festered. He has gathered a few desperate men. He still believes the tooth of the skybreaker is on this land. He believes you have it." A chill went down Emma's spine. "It's not here," she said. "Your father took it with him." "Fletcher doesn't believe that," Chayton said. "He is coming, Emma. Not for revenge, for redemption. He thinks finding it is his last chance. He will not stop this time. He will burn this cabin to the ground to find it." He left, a tiny speck walking east toward the reservation in a diminished future. Emma watched him go. She was truly alone now. The magic was gone. The shield was down, and her oldest enemy was on his way. She didn't run. This was her home. She spent the next 2 days fortifying the cabin, barricading the windows, and cleaning her shotgun and pistol. She had survived this long. She would not be run off her land by a ghost from the past. On the third day at dusk they arrived, 5 of them, led by a stooped, white-haired Roman Fletcher, his face a mask of bitter hatred. "Emma Jane," he croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "I know you're in there. Give me the relic. Give me the key. It's my last chance. Don't make me kill you for it." "There's nothing for you here, Roman," she shouted back from behind the thick oak door. "Go home and die in peace." "Peace?" He laughed, a horrible broken sound. "There's no peace for me. Not without that. Boys, burn her out." One of his men, carrying a torch, started toward the cabin. Emma raised her shotgun, its muzzle resting in a small notch she'd carved in the wall. She took a deep breath, aimed for the man's leg, and prepared to fire. And then she heard it, a sound she hadn't heard in a decade, the sound of unshod ponies. On the ridge behind Fletcher and his men, figures appeared, silhouetted against the dying sun. It was Chayton, and behind him were a dozen other men from the reservation. They were not the proud warriors of old. They were thin, dressed in tattered clothes, armed with old hunting rifles and bows. They were ghosts, but they were there. Fletcher and his men spun around, their jaws dropping. Chayton walked his pony slowly down the ridge. He stopped a few yards from Fletcher. "This land is Wakan," he said, his voice carrying in the still evening air. "The oath of Tatanka Sapa does not die. It lives in the memory of his people. Leave now." Fletcher stared at him, then at the silent figures on the ridge, then back at the cabin door where he knew a shotgun was aimed at his heart. He saw not a handful of defeated men, but the weight of an unbreakable promise, the spirit of a chief. He looked utterly broken. The fire in his eyes finally died, leaving only the empty shell of a bitter old man. Without a word, he turned his horse and rode away, his men scrambling after him, disappearing into the darkness. Defeated not by bullets, but by a vow they could never understand. The story of Emma Jane Thompson and Chief Black Buffalo isn't written in any history books. It's a tale that lives in the whisper of the wind through the pines of the Black Hills. It's a powerful reminder that even in the most brutal of times, courage isn't always about the fastest draw. Sometimes it's about an open door, a steady hand, and the choice to see the humanity in the face of an enemy. It shows us that a single act of compassion can create an echo that lasts forever, and a promise made in honor is more binding than any law. If this story of the Forgotten West moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates tales of true courage. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the dramatic, untold stories of our past.